Hello and welcome to your presentation for budgeting. So, just as the income statement tells a managerial accountant about past performance, the budget is developed to help us achieve future goals. Okay, so the budget is going to tell us what has to be done if predetermined profit and cost objectives are to be met. Okay? Without that budget, managers pretty much have to guess how much to spend and how much sales should be anticipated. So by forecasting and by budgeting, we have a better understanding as to how much sales we should be anticipating, but how much we also want to achieve. Good managers are going to build their budgets, monitor them closely, and then modify them when necessary to achieve those desired results. So it really helps us plan for different scenarios, because we usually developed a couple different budgets. It helps us prepare for what's to come with the market, what's going to happen in our industry and what's going to happen with tourism. It's a great way to communicate goals to your team. It's great to have department heads work together for common goals. It's always good to bring that together as teamwork. It really helps us develop prices, so any kind of pricing strategies. So revenue managers can have a better understanding of where the forecasts are and what they're budgeting for. There are three different types of budget typically, and that's going to be an annual budget that's developed by month to then create a year. So you develop an annual budget you develop a budget for every single month, and then you put them all together and add it up to create for your whole year. A long-range budget where you're looking mostly for capital projects, so any kind of big capital asset purchases. And then achievement budget, which is really just short-term budget. It's going to be talking about targets. There's also by purpose operations budget, where we're looking at more of the operations. So you'd be looking at summary operating statement, income statements, anything like that. There's your cash budgets, where we're looking more at the cash flow. And then our capital budgets, again, that's going to be your just the capital within the company itself. In managerial accounting, we concentrate more on operational budgets because those are the ones that you would see the most. An operations budget, it's a forecast of revenue, expenses, and the resulting profits for a selected accounting period. Before beginning the process of assembling an operations budget, managers have to have an understanding of the following. Prior period operating results. So if it's an existing operation, that is, you need to understand what happened in the past. It's always going to help you predict the future, just like we learned in forecasting. You need to understand some assumptions about what's going to happen in the next period. And then you want to have a knowledge of the organization's financial objectives. So what are the goals for this company? For this hotel, for this restaurant? Is it just to be profitable, or is it to be profitable by a certain amount? Is it a profit margin percentage? By knowing this, you can start to develop a more accurate budget. So budgets are developed on a monthly basis, operational budgets. The layout's going to follow the income statements that we've seen so far, so use Saline, USAR formats. For a hotel, though, what typically happens is you'll have departmental budgets, so each profit center would have its own mini income statement, right? And then each department would work on that, and then it would all be brought together to put together a consolidated statement, so a summary operating statement. Again, these are compiled by the month, and then by adding together all 3 months, you can then develop the one for the quarter. And then by adding all of the quarters or all the months together, you then have an annual budget. Okay? So really a budget's going to lay out the goals, and it's really our plan for the next amount of time. Okay? This budget process is extremely key in order to develop a good budget. It's best done by the entire management team. So really this is all about getting people involved and getting the buy-in. It's created, and then we create it by looking at forecasts and history. By looking at the history, we're able to have a more educated forecast, which can then help us develop this budget. Okay? Again, we develop by month, then quarters, then annual. A lot of the time, these budgets are going to be used for incentive plans. Okay? So what happens here is if you reach a certain budgetary goal, a lot of time you will receive some type of compensation as a manager. Having a certain food cost percentage or beverage cost percentage, having a certain cost of goods, any kind of revenue percentage, profit margin percentage. If you reach those goals, a lot of the time you're compensated. So we use budgets for incentive plans. Okay? With the budget process, we have to continuously review and update our budget. If after a month, we're into the first month of our year, and we find that our budgets are completely inaccurate, or there's a couple of things that are happening that would change our budget, we need to be able to adjust and update all of our budgets for the future. Okay? A lot of the time, you're going to see some hotels, restaurants create 2 or 3 versions of the budget. So the best case and worst case scenarios. So in the case that there is an economic downturn, they want to have a certain budget. Things are going well, you're going to have a different budget. Okay? But really the main thing is that you have to go through a really good budget process. So where you establish achievable goals, plan on how to achieve those goals, then analyze actual versus budget, take corrective action, and then improve the effectiveness of the cycle. So, establishing goals, these have to be achievable. So use history, research market conditions, etc. You just want to look up a bunch of information and forecast properly, and then you develop it monthly and bring it all together for an annual. The reason why this has to be achievable is if you set a budget, if you set a goal for your staff that's not achievable, you're not going to get enough buy-in. If you have a goal, a budget that's too low, your staff may not work as hard. Okay? So really this first part is extremely important. You have to establish a very achievable goal, but that's still a challenge to your staff. Okay? Then you have to plan how you're going to achieve these goals. So this is where managers meet with department heads to review business prediction levels, and how they can each plan to help achieve them. So how are we going to reach these goals? With that food cost percentage, well, how are we going to reduce our waste? How are we going to do this? How are we going to achieve our profit margin? How are we going to increase our demand? Okay, so there's a lot of planning on that goes on once we have our budget. How are we going to get those goals? Then we're going to analyze our actual versus our budget. So this is where we compare the actual versus our budget. So how did we compare it to budget? Managers have to be able to justify why certain figures either exceeded or fell short of the budgeted amounts. Because if we establish achievable goals and we set out a plan as to how we're going to get there, and we come short of these goals, we need to really be able to explain to our managers, to our owners, well, why did we not reach this goal? What happened? Okay. Then we need to take corrective action. So once we do see any shortcomings, what can we do? How can we fix these shortfalls? What can we do in the future? And then with that information, we can then improve the effectiveness, and we can get all stakeholders together and discuss ways to improve not only the budget process, but how we're doing. Are we being efficient enough? Now, I only spoke about someone who's not doing well, but if we did better in this part, when we analyze our actual versus budget, if we did better than our budget, well, then we're happy. And maybe the corrective action is we need to set our budget possibly even higher, okay, to again make sure that it's establishing achievable goals. So to establish achievable goals, we have to estimate demand. So we have to develop a monthly demand forecast for all revenue streams. So that's the history, the revenue mix, marketplace knowledge. We have to be able to actually look at all of those to estimate what our demand's going to be. We can also estimate our prices, what we believe we're going to have as an average daily rate or an average check. This is going to be based on your strategic position, so how much you want to charge. Do you want to be the highest, the lowest? Do you want to follow your competition? It's going to depend on your competitive set. So what is your competition charging? And then what's going on in the marketplace? Are we experiencing more people coming in? Or do we have a strong economy or a low economy? And then we're going to estimate our expenses. So we're going to look a lot at historical expenses, and we're going to look at our common size analysis, our per unit analysis, and along with this demand and the estimating the demand and the prices, we can then better estimate our expenses using that common size percentages, those common size percentages that we talked about. Okay? All of these goals, all of these estimations in demand, prices, expenses, they have to be defensible. You can't simply just say, we believe we're going to have this much in average daily rate, or this much as an average check, and we believe we're going to have this much of an occupancy. You have to be able to answer to your owners as to how you came to that budget, how you came to that number. And then we move on to achieving the goals. So it's just like a plan to get somewhere. So you have a marketing plan that should be developed on a yearly basis, and that's going to help us ensure that we're going to get the demand that we want to. Pricing plan is going to be to ensure that we hit our average checks and our average daily rate targets. So how are we going to price properly to make sure that we reach those goals? And then our expense plan. So this is where we're going to look at our staffing. So we need to make sure that we're controlling our costs there. What's going to happen with our wage policies? Are we increasing wages? What's going to happen? Are there going to be bonuses? We need to make sure we evaluate all of that with this new budget in mind. Cost of goods plan. So we need to make sure that we meet our targets with our cost of goods sold. Purchasing policies. So we have to make sure that we evaluate what we're purchasing, how much we're purchasing, how are we going to make sure that we're not purchasing too much, and when we are purchasing items to run our hotel or restaurant, that we're purchasing them at the most efficient price possible. And then we want to make sure that we plan out inventory controls. So how are we going to make sure that we control our inventory, that we don't have too much on hand or not enough, that things are properly monitored with our inventory on a weekly, monthly basis. It's really whatever the hotel or restaurant decides to do. And then we want to look at potentially here at this point in the plan, alternative scenarios. Okay, so we might prepare a different budget for a different scenario. If things are going really well for the hotel, well, how can we alter it? If we experience a certain downturn, if we're unsure about how construction might affect our hotel or restaurant, we might develop a budget based on historical information, but then also develop a budget based on the fact that we think maybe the construction may hurt us quite a bit. So we develop different ones. So this would be the part where we've actually experienced something. So we've developed a budget, we've established those goals, we've put together a plan, and now we've actually gone through that period in time. Okay? Now we have to analyze what actually happened versus our budget. Okay? This we typically do on the monthly budgets so that we can look for variations to budget, either better or worse. Either way, we need to explain what happened. And how do we do that? Well, our common size analysis is going to help us. Our comparative demand analysis, okay? Our comparative analysis where we look at absolute and relative percentage, our per unit comparative, and variance analysis on any prices or costs. So these should look very similar because it's really just our income statement analysis that we've done already, where we're evaluating our common size for actual versus budget. So in the past we compared one period to another. Now we're really just comparing how we did compared to what our goals were, okay? To find out how we performed compared to our goals. And then lastly, another way to analyze, it's keeping a pulse on customer feedback. And the big thing that we keep on talking about is value perception. So sure, maybe you might reach bonus goals, and that's one thing we have to be careful with. Is the fact that people try to reach a revenue goal a bit too aggressively by charging too much rate in the rates. Well, all of a sudden what may happen is value perception. Well, sure, it might look great comparative demand and comparative analysis, it might look great, the fact that, you know what, oh, you definitely, you did a great job there, you reached your revenue goal. But maybe you overcharged based on what you're offering, and now customers are upset, and now that may have a long-standing effect on the hotel. So you have to be careful with how you budget as well. And then we get to corrective actions. So potential issues that might happen are going to be demand forecast shortfalls or unplanned increases, price shortfalls or surges in expense challenges, so higher per unit or too low loss of value. So basically, what would happen if you experience an increase in costs? Maybe you didn't get the rate that you thought you wanted. But what you need to do at the end of the day is you need to investigate reasons for any kind of issues. Understand that the cause is unique, okay, or an ongoing issue. So you need to make sure that you evaluate whether something that happened is going to only happen my 1 month that I'm evaluating, or if this is going to affect all of my budgets, because then I have to go back and actually adjust those future periods, adjust those budgets based on what happened in the past period. Okay? And then make any budget modifications. And then always make sure you're keeping an eye on your value proposition. So, if something is low in your demand, you might add more marketing. You might check social media sites to see what your customers thought. You're going to want your review marketing. You're going to want to review your marketing plan as well. You want to see if demand is affected because of external factors. So, economic downturn. When 9/11 happened, terrorism, that affected a lot of demand in a lot of places for tourism. So what happened? Plan for the lower demand and revise all associated expenses. So you want to make sure that you keep an eye on why something happened, and just always evaluate your expenses right after. So for prices, review your average prices and try and figure out how you can fix it. So if there was a shortfall in your pricing. Expenses, same thing. If we have a bad month, we have to adjust next month to make sure we still meet our annual goal. So we need to make sure that maybe we're being a bit more aggressive when cutting costs, so cutting our variable costs. Okay? So we need to constantly keep an eye on our budgets and make any adjustments to try and make up for any kind of shortcomings from one period to another. And then we have to improve the effectiveness of the cycle. So keep track of issues and document. Keep track of everything that's happened. So what were the forecasting issues? Was it demand? Was it price? Was it expenses? Which one was it? And what can we do? And then we need to follow through on those issues. So how are we going to actually plan to achieve our goals even though we had a bad period? And then we need to basically analyze issues, and then we basically need to take a look at overall, how are we successful, how did we fail, and what can we do to continue to be better at budgeting and at forecasting. So that is the budget process. It's a repetitive one where we establish our goals, we plan on how to achieve them, we then analyze how we did compared to budget. We take corrective action to adjust our budgets in the future, to adjust cost cutting or maybe try and increase revenues in order to reach our overall goal. And then we sit down and we make sure that we evaluate our entire process to make sure that we're being as effective as possible. And then we start over again. We would start to establish achievable goals again, and this is a constant cycle. Okay? After being with an organization for a few years, this becomes really second nature. You meet every year and you go through this budgetary process and you constantly keep an eye on what you're doing compared to budget. Every large hotel and restaurant does this for sure.